Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Por la ayuda financiera de la Unión Europea.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral. para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CTOUR, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno y lo dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras se aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children, and they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo del público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral. Que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement quédate en casa, que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to all member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SBDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CTOUR, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children, and they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
Ambassador Mendez.
He's connected, but I think he's not there.
ESG Mendez, do we have a quorum?
Coming.
Good morning, Ambassador Sanders, Soron. With your permission, sir, we will proceed now to do the confirmation of quorum.
Thank you very much.
We will finalize now the phase of testing audio and video, and connected so far, having done both of those tests on our Kuro virtual system, are the following delegations: Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina, Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, the United States, Guatemala, Honduras, Jamaica, Nicaragua, Paraguay, Peru, Dominican Republic, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, Uruguay, and Venezuela. We have quorum, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary General Mr. Mendez. Distinguished heads of delegation, distinguished representatives of member states, Mr. Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Mr. Assistant Secretary General of the OAS, distinguished permanent observers to this organization, representatives of international organizations, representatives of civil society organizations and other social actors, special guests, ladies and gentlemen. Before we proceed any further this morning, it is my sad duty to advise this assembly that one of our own, a former Assistant Secretary General of our organization, Christopher Thomas, died this morning. Christopher Thomas was a native of Trinidad and Tobago and of CARICOM. He was Assistant Secretary General from 1990 to 2000 and served our organization with great distinction. There will be an opportunity for the Permanent Council to pay full tribute to him. But I would now like to invite all distinguished representatives to join me in a moment's silence in memory of Christopher Thomas. A moment's silence, if you please. I thank all the distinguished delegates for joining me in that moment of silence for our distinguished brother, Christopher Thomas. Now, distinguished ministers and heads of delegation, other delegates to this important General Assembly, I am greatly honored to address the first plenary session of the 51st regular session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States. I would like to begin by extending our warm greetings to the heads of delegations, to the delegations gathered here in the Hall of the Americas of the organization's headquarters in Washington, D.C., and to those participating virtually in this regular session of the General Assembly. Distinguished representatives, This is the second time and the second successive year that the member states of the OAS have been constrained to hold our General Assembly virtually because of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. While we are all agreed that virtual meetings are better than no meetings, we also know that these meetings are not a substitute for personal gatherings, where existing friendships are strengthened, new friendships are made, and areas of collaboration are developed through discussion. All this underlines the vital importance of cooperation and coordination among all our countries to curb the present COVID-19 pandemic and to prepare for the possibilities of new pandemics. The world should not again be caught in a situation of lack of preparedness, which was evident with the COVID-19 pandemic. Similarly, humanity should never again be confronted by the nationalist policies that drove the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, resulting in inequitable access and distribution of vaccines. If the pandemic taught us one lesson, it is that no nation is safe from communicable diseases and from pandemics unless and until all countries are safe. We have the responsibility to ourselves, to our peoples, and to all humanity to send a message from this General Assembly that we are ready and willing to work with each other and with the global community to safeguard the lives and livelihoods of our people, particularly the most vulnerable amongst us. Distinguished representatives, it now falls to us to elect the President of the 51st regular session of the General Assembly. In order to do that, I would like to offer the floor to delegations. The floor is open. There is a request from the distinguished representative of Colombia for the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Es un honor para mí nominar a su excelencia Pedro Brolo Vila, ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Guatemala, para ejercer la presidencia del 51º periodo ordinario de sesiones de la Asamblea General. El liderazgo del canciller Brolo es bien conocido en el hemisferio y su gestión viene precedida por un reconocimiento general como catedrático especializado en derechos humanos, cambio climático.
We are pleased to appoint Minister Brolo. He is very well known in every sphere and not least in the public sector in Guatemala. He has astounding history in this very organization. And for all of these reasons, we are very honored to put him forward as a candidate to the President of the Assembly. The interpreter regrets the microphone wouldn't turn on. Sorry.
The Dominican Republic.
Colombia, y pedimos que sea por aclamación.
By acclamation.
Of Guatemala be done by acclamation? And if so, I put that to the Assembly. Do we agree on acclamation? We do, and in that case, I would like at this point Your Excellency, Pedro Villa, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Guatemala, allow me to extend on behalf of all the delegations here today and on my own behalf, our most sincere congratulations on your election as President of this 51st regular session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States. I wish you success in this undertaking, and I am pleased to invite you to take your place at the head table. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Mr. President.
Señoras y señores, ministros de Relaciones Exteriores y jefes de delegación.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished heads of delegation, distinguished head of the Permanent Council of the OAS and the General Committee, Ambassador Jose Fiallo, permanent representative of the Dominican Republic before the OAS. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished representatives of the member states, distinguished Secretary General of the OAS, Don Luis Almagro Lemes, distinguished Assistant Secretary General, Ambassador Nestor Mendez, ladies and gentlemen, observers, permanent observers of the OAS, and representatives of international organizations, representatives of the organizations of civil society and other social actors, special guests, esteemed ladies and gentlemen. The government of Guatemala and I personally consider this a signal honor to be able to preside over the 51st General Assembly of the Organization of American States. I appreciate the words of the distinguished Vice Minister, Maria Carmenina Londoño of Colombia, as well as the backing by the distinguished Minister of Foreign Affairs, Roberto Alvarez, for having nominated me to preside over this 51st General Assembly, and to have suggested kindly that that election be accepted by acclamation. Let me likewise turn to the General Assembly as a whole and thank it all, you all, for your generous support for the heading of this 51st session of the GA. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegation, I have every confidence that the meeting that we are about to begin will serve to reaffirm the Organization of American States as the premier regional forum in which a spirit of cooperation and friendship continue to prevail, the length and breadth of this hemisphere strengthening the institutionality of our organization. The very theme of this 51st General Assembly, towards a renewed America, will invite us, spur us to deploy even greater efforts that will allow us to face the challenges and as yet perhaps unimagined, unexpected difficulties that we must see and overcome if indeed we do believe that we shall create this America steeped in renewal. I am very willing and again honored to preside over our debates and to garner the political support for all of the issues that we are going to discuss. And I wish us every best in that endeavor. To continue, let us simply look at the agreements that have been prepared by the General Committee, and I would give the floor now to Ambassador Jose Fiallo, who is, of course, the ambassador for the Dominican Republic here at the OAS, for him to present to us the results of this preparation for the 51st GA. You have the floor, Ambassador Fiallo. I thank you very much, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegation and heads of the permanent representatives of member states, distinguished Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, permanent observers, representatives of international organizations, representatives of civil society organizations, and other social actors. Dear guests, special guests, ladies and gentlemen, in my capacity as a chair of the preparatory committee for this GA, it is an honor for me to put before you a summary of the work that we have done on the basis of the rules of procedure of the GA. Now, for the sake of time, sir, and because this was published under AG/DOC 5721/4121, involves a summary of all of the issues that we discussed, allow me at this point merely to highlight the agreements that were adopted by the Preparatory Commission in preparation for this 51st session of the GA. The committee met on the 15th of September and the 26th of October of 2021, as well as in a regular meeting of the Permanent Council on November 4th, which acted as a preparatory committee based on Article 91F of the Charter of the OAS. At the time, the order of precedence of delegations was selected by drawing lots as well as for the Permanent Council, and this was designated for this period last Friday. On the basis of the work of the chair of the Honorable Representative of Guatemala before the OAS and on the regulations in course, we looked at the list of issues to be covered and the calendars, as well as procedural issues that I will point to immediately. It was decided that the plenary sessions of the GA, working groups, and other events held under the 51st GA shall take place virtually. The 51st regular session of the General Assembly to begin on November 10th and to end on Friday, November 12th. Of 2021. Further decided that the statements of the heads of delegation of the plenary should not exceed 6 minutes length, that for the discussion of heads of delegation, the order of precedence that was established by the preparatory committee shall be followed per our meeting of September 15th last, and per Articles 20 and 27 of the regulations, 9 a.m. November 10th of 2021 would be the start, and according to Article 73 of the Rules of Procedure, the election shall be done by secret ballot unless by acclamation, as agreed and will be described later. And in Article 77 of the Rules of Procedure, the minutes of the plenary shall be verbatim, and should the GA decide to establish the General Committee, the minutes of that committee shall be summarized. On this basis, and given the results of the work carried out by the CAP under the aegis of the distinguished Ambassador of Canada, Ambassador Hugh Outsett, the preparatory committee shall be considering a draft resolution, the program budget for the organization, and it was agreed that it should be presented to the plenary of this General Assembly. Mr. President, thank you very much for your kind attention and that of the entire public. Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation, Ambassador Fiallo. Esteemed colleagues, having heard this report from the chair of the preparatory committee, I put to you the result of the procedures that were agreed for this 51st General Assembly, as you have it in AG/DOC/572421. In that regard, allow me to stress the following. We very much request that these following points be remembered through to the end. The General Assembly shall be held virtually. Statements of heads of delegation in the plenary sessions should not exceed a time frame of 6 minutes maximum. The granting of the word of the floor, the interpreter corrects herself, shall be done virtually, and the chair shall be giving the floor in the order in which the requests were received. For the meetings of heads of delegation or statements that have been received in that have been taped previously, the order of precedence that will have been agreed at the preparatory committee shall also be met. Shall begin at 9 a.m. The Assistant Secretary General will speak on item 7 of this meeting regarding the proposals that might have been received under that vote. The voting shall be secret unless by acclamation. Elections shall be in person, depending on the logistics on the basis of the logistics that the Secretariat has set forth. Without objection, ladies and gentlemen, these procedural issues are now approved. I thank you.
Responde a la aprobación del proyecto de
The next item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda, item 3, as per the rules of procedure in Article 34. The draft agenda was prepared by the Preparatory Committee and published as document AG/Doc 5723/21. I now call on any delegation who wishes to refer to this draft agenda. Costa Rica, Minister Rodolfo Solano has the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I wish you the best of success in your position. I would like to request that we include in the agenda of this regular session the item entitled The Situation in Haiti. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Minister Rodolfo Solano. Are there any comments on this proposal made by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Costa Rica? Nicaragua has asked for the floor. I now call on the delegation of Nicaragua. Distinguished President of the 51st General Assembly of the OAS, Mr. Pedro Brolo Villa, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Guatemala, distinguished Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Heads of State of Government of the Americas, Mr. Secretary General and Mr. Assistant Secretary General. This delegation categorically rejects inclusion of item number 24 in the agenda of this General Assembly. We would like to denounce the continuous manipulation of this organization to the in prejudice of the people of Nicaragua. We urge that you abide by the principles of national sovereignty, free self-determination, and non-intervention in the affairs of a state. We have been consistent in our message, and with the renewed mandate of the people of Nicaragua that was elected in a free, transparent, and sovereign way, with a vote of almost 3 million Nicaraguan citizens on November 7th last, together with them, we will continue to forge a future of peace, well-being, and success. We would like to request that our rejection of this item of the agenda be included in the minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much to the representative of the delegation of Nicaragua. And we take note of the position taken by Nicaragua, and it will be reflected in the minutes. I now call on the delegation of the Dominican Republic. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The Dominican Republic supports the proposal made by the delegation of Costa Rica that the situation in Haiti item be included in the agenda. Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister. If there are no other comments, the chair suggests that the plenary adopt the draft agenda for the 51st regular session of the General Assembly, document AG/Doc 5723/21, with the request to include the new item requested by the delegation of Costa Rica. If there is no objection, the draft agenda is adopted. Let's now move on to item 4 of the agenda on the adoption of the schedule for the 51st regular session of the General Assembly, document AG 5725/21, Rev 3. In the draft calendar, the closing session is scheduled for 6 p.m. tomorrow, Friday, 12th of November, and I would therefore like to urge full cooperation of delegations so that we can conclude the items included in the agenda within that time frame. And I'd like to note that any adjustments made to the schedule are subject to the powers given to the chair by Article 15 of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly. If there is no objection, the draft schedule is approved. The next item of the agenda refers to the report of the Secretary General on the credentials of those delegations participating at the 51st regular session of the General Assembly. In this regard, I report that in compliance with Article 27 of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly, the Secretary General has presented the corresponding report. And this report has been distributed to delegations in document AG/Doc 5744/21. And in that document, the Secretariat has drawn up the list, provisional list of participants, which appears in document AG/Doc 5743/21. The report takes note of the credentials presented in proper time and in due form by the delegations of member states, permanent observers, and those credentials of the representatives of bodies, organizations, and inter-American system entities, as well as other international organizations. The delegation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines has asked for the floor. You have the floor, sir.
I'm sorry, ma'am, your telephone is on, your speaker is on mute.
Thank you. My apologies. Thank you, Your Excellency, Pedro Brolo, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Guatemala and President of the General Assembly, Honorable Ministers, Heads of Delegations, Excellencies, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, Permanent Observers, Delegates, good day. The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines wishes to congratulate the government of Guatemala for hosting this regular session of the General Assembly. On the issue of credentials, St. Vincent and the Grenadines wishes to register its objection to the delegation of Venezuela. We are unable to join with the majority on the approval of the declaration and place on record our reservation. In 2017, the duly elected government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela made a sovereign decision to withdraw from the membership of the OAS. This denunciation of the OAS was to have come into effect on April 27, 2019. St. Vincent and the Grenadines did not support Resolution CP Res 1124 of April 9, 2019, which sought to appoint Mr. Gustavo Tare as the National Assembly's representative to the OAS. We therefore do not accept the credentials of any person here purporting to represent the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela at the 51st regular session of the General Assembly. St. Vincent and the Grenadines therefore notifies all member states that the General Secretariat, of the Organization of American States, that until further notice, it is not bound by any declaration or resolution emanating from this 51st regular session of the General Assembly or any future declarations or resolutions of any council or organ of the organization, when these include the participation of any person or entity purporting to speak for or act on behalf of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. The presentation of this declaration, similar to the versions adopted in 2019 and at last year's regular session of the OAS General Assembly, is in fact a clear breach of the principles and tenets of the international law. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
The delegation of Mexico has asked for the floor. I call on the Mexican delegation. Go ahead, please. Thank you, Mr. President. Congratulations on your election. Distinguished delegates, as has occurred in the General Assemblies of 2019 and 2020, Mexico observes with concern the inconsistency and irregularity in the report of the Secretary General on the presentation of the credentials of the participating delegations in the 51st regular session of the General Assembly, which are based on acts contrary to international law and establish a serious precedent in the OAS in attributing powers that do not correspond to it. In view of this, the government of Mexico would like to state in the minutes and documents of the General Assembly the following. One, that the accreditation of the delegations participating in the General Assembly represent an act of a declarative nature whose validity is derived from their position as a member of the organization. Two, that this is limited to the material participation of the delegation in the work of the corresponding body. Three, the limitation does not constitute or endow any government with special rights, as that is not mentioned by the Charter or by international law. Accreditation of any person that says to represent the state of Venezuela within the framework of the OAS is an act in violation of international law because the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela renounced its membership in the organization in April of 2017. Therefore, in 2019, the organization has acted in defect to this country. The link that Venezuela maintains with the organization, according to the provisions of Article 143 of the OAS Charter, to international obligations that still need to be fulfilled. In the recognition of a government is a sovereign act of the state, not of international organizations. The OAS does not possess, nor can it arrogate upon itself, the power to give collective recognition of membership. Therefore, any act in that direction is out of its scope of power and is null. If any person remains accredited as a representative of Venezuela to the OAS on the basis of ultra-vires acts, Mexico will continue to participate and exercise its own prerogatives and rights within its bodies and organizations and entities where it is recognized that it agrees to the recognition of no government. Mexico exercises its right to maintain or suspend diplomatic relations with any country, and without violating the right of a state or people to maintain or replace their own government or authority, and this without this having to impact its participation as a member state of the OAS, nor represent any recognition of by the governments of this hemisphere. Therefore, Mexico reserves upon itself the right to question the validity of agreements and decisions made by bodies, organizations of the OAS when these are in contradiction with international law, and these agreements or decisions exceed the scope of competence of the OAS without jeopardizing the rights and obligations that correspond to us as a member state of the organization. We have introduced a footnote to the credentials report at the 19th regular session and 50th regular session of the OAS, and we have submitted a reservation in virtue of the approval of resolution CP/Res.1124 of the Permanent Council, and thus Mexico would like to request that since the accreditation of a Venezuelan delegation to this GA has been included, that same footnote be included in all minutes and documents of this session. And I have submitted the text in writing to you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ambassador. I now call on the representative of Bolivia, Hector Arcesa Puneta. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to all delegations. Congratulations on having been elected by acclamation. Bolivia expresses with concern that the report of the Secretary General on the presentation of the credentials of the participating delegations at the 51st regular session of the OAS-GA includes serious violations of international law and the principle of regional integration. In 2017, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, exercising its sovereignty, denounced the Charter of the OAS of 1948, which, according to Article 48, after 2 years of that denunciation, the Charter ceases to apply to the denouncing state, and that state will be completely and totally unlinked from the organization. Since 4 years have elapsed since Venezuela denounced the Charter, it is not appropriate to recognize any delegation from that state. This arbitrary and unilateral decision, taken once again by the General Secretariat, undermines all the legality of the acts of the OAS and violates the sovereignty of states. Therefore, the plurinational state of Bolivia observes and does not accept the credentials of an alleged delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and as the United States of Mexico has said, we submit a footnote that we request be included in each and every one of the documents that are to be considered and discussed at this 51st regular session of the OAS General Assembly. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ambassador. I now will call on the delegation of Nicaragua. Please noting, however, that there are two requests of the floor by Nicaragua, and I ask that there be only one spokesperson for Nicaragua in this section. I would therefore like to appreciate it if you would tell us who will be taking the floor on behalf of Nicaragua. I call on the delegation of Nicaragua. Nicaragua, can you please request the floor? Distinguished President, Nicaragua embraces the declarations made by the delegations of St. Vincent the Grenadines, Mexico, and Bolivia in rejecting the irregular accreditation of persons who pretend to usurp the legal representation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and the legitimate presidency of President Nicolás Maduro Modoro. We would request that this rejection appear in all documents dealt with by this 51st General Assembly of the OAS. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. We will now proceed. Oh, I call on the delegation of Argentina. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We thank the Secretary General for his report on credentials that has been presented, even though it has been included in that delegation persons who do not have the necessary credentials to represent the state they claim to state. Argentina believes there are clear rules in the OAS and international law on whether one belongs or does not belong to this organization. Therefore, in compliance with the rules applying to representation by member states, we believe necessary measures should be taken to correct these distortions which affect the functions of this organization. We would like to therefore note our objection in the minutes of this meetings, and that a footnote be included in the credentials report, which the text that will read as follows and has been submitted to the Secretariat for this purpose. It reads, the Republic of Argentina understands that the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has withdrawn from the Organization of American States through the notification made by President Nicolás Maduro to the General Secretariat in April 2017 regarding the decision that country took to denounce the charter of the organization. By virtue of this, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is no longer a member of the organization, and therefore Argentina believes that we need to assess the situation, and we are not in a position to recognize the credentials of any designated representative of Venezuela at this General Assembly. Thank you very much. Thank you. We shall now proceed to Dominica. You have the floor, Dominica.
Mr. Chair, Dominica would like to support the statement made by my colleague Minister from St. Vincent as it relates to the recognition of the credentials of the delegation from Venezuela, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, as the National Assembly representative to the OAS. And we would like to place on record and be included in the minutes our non-recognition of the credentials of the delegation from the said and Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. I thank you.
Thank you very much.
I now call on Ambassador Ronald Sanders of Antigua and Barbuda. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Antigua and Barbuda considers that the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is not a member state of the Organization of American States. Since on April 27, 2017, the government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela properly notified the Secretary General of its denunciation of the Charter in accordance with Article 143 of the Charter of the OAS, and the Charter ceased to be in force with respect to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, which ceased to belong to this organization on the 27th of April 2019. Since then, we have had a usurper representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, one which has no foundation in international law, and indeed was a violation of the rules of this organization. We registered that we did not support resolution CP/Res 1124-2217/19 of April 9, 2019, which sought to appoint a representative of the National Assembly to the OAS. We did not accept the credentials of the officials intending to represent the Bolivarian Republic at the 49th regular session of the General Assembly, nor did we do so at the 50th General Assembly. Indeed, we believe that this is a myth that the OAS is perpetuating, that somehow the National Assembly still has a representative at this organization. And that myth demonstrates itself in other ways. According to the books of the Organization of American States, Venezuela owes the organization at this moment $15.3 million in outstanding dues. That is an awful lot of money, and it distorts the accounts of the OAS. And were we a business, the business would be told that it was insolvent and made to wrap up, because you cannot book on your accounts monies which you know you will not get. And throughout the period of the so-called representatives of the National Assembly of Venezuela, not one penny was paid to this organization. Given all of that, Mr. President, Antigua and Barbuda maintains its position that we will not accept the credentials of any usurper regime, nor will we accept that Venezuela is still a member of this organization. And we will register, as we have done in the past, our objection to any decision or declaration that is made by the OAS in any of its organs that reflects a majority with the representative of the purported representatives of Venezuela participating. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now it's the turn to the
Mr. President, congratulations on your election for the 51st Ordinary Session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States. On behalf of Belize, I wish to associate myself with the sentiments expressed by the speakers who went before me. It is a fact that Venezuela has withdrawn from the Organization of American States. It is not a member of this organization. The imposter who purports to represent the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is not recognized by Belize, and we reject the purported credentials of this imposter. Mr. President, in the interest of time, I will simply associate myself with the sentiments expressed by the speakers before me and reserve Belize's position with respect to the participation of this imposter and any decision of this General Assembly that records the vote of the imposter. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Courtney. Now it's the
Good morning, Honorable Minister and Chair of this 51st regular session of the General Assembly. The delegation of Trinidad and Tobago takes the floor on the matter under discussion. But before addressing our comments to this matter, Chair, this delegation is obliged to express its deep appreciation to the General Assembly for the sign of solidarity displayed this morning with the announcement of the passing of our most distinguished former ambassador and Assistant Secretary General of this organization,
Sanchez of Canada requested to speak.
Ambassador Christopher Thomas. Chair, this being the first occasion on which this delegation takes the floor, we also must join other delegations in congratulating you on your election and you and your great nation. And we look forward to a successful General Assembly. Chair, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, this delegation joins with other delegations that took the floor previously to register its objection to the report on credentials, which at this point includes the purported representative of a sovereign country that on the records of this organization denounced the charter of the organization and withdrew from this organization. Chair, this delegation has placed on record with footnotes at successive General Assemblies, the 49th and the 50th, to explain the basis for our objection, and therefore we would wish to have our delegation added to the list of delegations that reiterate that objection, and we will submit a footnote again to that effect. Deeply grateful for the courtesy of your attention, Chair, and we look forward to the success of this General Assembly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. De no haber más comentarios, la presidencia sugiere que la Asamblea General.
In the absence of any further comments, the Chair suggests that we take good note of the comments made with regard to the report and the General and comments of the delegations, which will be included in the minutes of this plenary session. And pursuant to Articles 22 and 24 of the Rules of Procedure, we now move to set up the General Committee, which shall include representatives of all member states who are listed as participants at this General Assembly, in the absence of any comments. In the absence of any comments, as I just said, said General Committee is hereby established. But I see the delegation of Mexico taking the floor. You have the floor, Madam Ambassador. Mexico, please. Are we connected with the ambassador for Mexico? The answer appears to be yes. Ambassador, might you request the floor again? The technical services are suggesting. We have only heard half the sentence. The word Panama has been mentioned, the interpreter points out. The chair, let us try to resolve this, and we'll give the floor to Panama meanwhile. The delegation of Panama has the floor. Thank you very much, Chair. I quickly take the floor while the technical problem is resolved. I begin, of course, by congratulating you, and on behalf of the delegation of Panama, wish you every success in your guidance of this important General Assembly. And please know that we are deeply grateful to your country, to you yourself, and to Ambassador Rita Scioli, who did so much in stellar fashion throughout the year. I am very honored to put forward the representative of the Dominican Republic, Jose Fiallo, to chair the General Committee. Ambassador Fiallo is presently the chair of the Permanent Council, and throughout 2021, he also headed up the CAJP. We have all witnessed his extraordinary ability to steer us through sometimes choppy waters with his renowned and very well-garnered reputation as a consummate diplomat. And he knows the work of this organization deeply and has indeed steered us in a very effective and efficient manner. In these perilous times, I believe that we need innovation, determination, and these are qualities that our beloved colleague has in reams. We see also this reflected in the organization, and that is why I'm very pleased indeed to put forward our good friend to chair the General Committee. Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind words, Ambassador. I now see Ambassador Luz Helena Baños Rivas of Mexico requesting the floor. You have the floor. Thank you. Mexico wishes to second the proposal put forward by the distinguished delegation of Panama, the Ambassador Roquever, so that the Ambassador Jose Fiallo of the Dominican Republic head the General Committee as chair of the Permanent Council and the Committee on Advisory Juridical Affairs. We know that Ambassador Fiallo knows firsthand all of the ins and outs and the difficulties that may come before the General Committee, and we have full trust that his experience, his seasoned hand, and the great trust we have in him will not be disappointed. That is why Mexico is very pleased indeed to second this proposal, and I ask that he be so by acclamation. Thank you very much, esteemed Ambassador. Let us now then run to complete the order of business. First of all, then, having put the General Committee of this 51st General Assembly in operation, and without further ado, having heard Panama and Mexico, it is my great pleasure indeed to declare Ambassador Jose Fiallo, Permanent Representative of the Dominican Republic to the OAS, as Chairman of the General Committee of this 51st General Assembly. The Chair and the actual appointment and the Rapporteur shall be dealt with in the first meeting thereof. Ambassador Mendes, you have the floor, sir.
On the matter of the assignment of topics, Therefore like to inform that in fact, 2 draft declarations and 2 draft resolutions were officially presented before that deadline, and they should therefore be considered by the General Committee. The draft declarations and resolutions presented in a timely manner are the following. Number 1, draft resolution entitled Developments in the COVID-19 Pandemic and its Impact on the Hemisphere, contained in document AG/Doc 5745/21. Number 2, draft declaration, the situation in Haiti, contained in document AG/Doc 5746/21, who delegations will recall has been subsumed now under the new agenda item number 27, included this morning by the plenary. Number 3, draft declaration renewed commitment to sustainable development in the Americas post-COVID-19, contained in document AG/Doc 5747/20. And number 4, draft resolution, the situation in Nicaragua, contained in document AG/Doc 5748/21. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Méndez. La Comisión General deberá concluir sus labores mañana, antes del inicio de la cuarta sesión plenaria, es decir, antes de las 3 p.m.
This work should be closed before 3 p.m. tomorrow, and at that point, a report will be presented to plenary on the issues in conformity with Article 25 of the Rules of Procedure. If there are no further comments or observations, this first session of the plenary will end and the second will begin immediately. Let me then immediately declare open the second session of the plenary of this 51st General Assembly, and we continue with a presentation of the annual report of the Permanent Council, document AG Doc 57, 26, 21, and addenda. And I give the floor to the chair of the Permanent Council, Ambassador Jose Fiallo, who represents the Dominican Republic among us, who will now put before us his report on the affairs as of the last General Assembly, the 50th. You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, heads of delegation, heads of the member states, and Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, observers, representatives of the international organizations, heads of and representatives of civil society and other social actors, and special guests. Ladies and gentlemen, in my capacity as chair of the Permanent Council, it is an honor for me to put before you in this plenary session of the 51st General Assembly, regular General Assembly of the OAS, the report on the Permanent Council. And the report that I am speaking of has been published as AG/Doc 5726/21, and 5 addenda attached thereto, where you will see listed the activities of the the Permanent Council and its subsidiary organs on the basis of all the regulations and the mandates received by the Secretary General, as well as draft resolutions and various other documents put to the plenary, as well as comments by the member states regarding the reports of the different special agencies on the basis of Article 91 of the Charter. Chair, as I pointed out a few weeks ago as I took over the Permanent Council, the Americas and indeed the whole world have had to reinvent themselves, have had to face the exigencies of COVID-19. Being resilient in the face of this crisis, the Permanent Council did everything it could to maintain the continuity of its work without allowing these great challenges to affect its work. This has been done despite the limited resources available to us, and we held no fewer than 43 virtual meetings, of which 25 were regular, 17 special, and 1 protocolary, to receive at the headquarters of the organization His Excellency Pedro Castillo, President of the Republic of Peru. As the report states, the Permanent Council continued to ascribing priority to the 4 pillars of the organization, and there is no doubt, of course, to the situation resultant from COVID-19 and the debacle over vaccination. What you see is a unanimous support of Resolutions 1165 of the 7th of February of 2021 and the very high level of participation at the special session of last September 30th, where we studied the impact of the pandemic on the hemisphere and heard the Prime Minister of Barbados, Her Excellency Andy Moti, the President of Colombia, His Excellency Iván Duque, and the President of Guatemala, His Excellency Alejandro Gianmattei, and other high authorities of the member states and the organizations that are all part of this hemisphere, principally the Pan American Health Organization, as to the mandates that the General Assembly has tasked us with. And I mentioned here then special sessions that we had to cover vacancies at the Commission and in the Commission on Human Rights and in other respects. On the basis of the Charter, we held the International Day for the Remembrance of Victims of the Slave Trade and the day dedicated to remember of original peoples. On the basis of Resolution 2961 of the General Assembly, I'm pleased to point out to you that on the basis of the working group that has been tasked with the norms and procedures of the Permanent Council and its subsidiary organs, presided over by the distinguished representative of Ecuador, Don Carlos Játiva, we approved the resolutions that were put forward by that group and modified in pertinent parts of the regulation and included for the first time inclusive language in the wording. I am more than ever convinced of the transcendence of the Permanent Council of the OAS because you have here a real space for encounter, and we have become very much more effective in facing the challenges that have risen. Now, I don't want to end before thanking Ambassador Audrey Marks, the permanent representative for Jamaica, Ambassador María del Carmen Rocaberg, permanent representative of Panama, Ambassador Sir Ronald Sanders, permanent representative for Antigua and Barbuda, Ambassador Washington Abdallah, permanent representative for Uruguay, and Ambassador Harold Forsyth, the permanent representative for Peru, for their respective excellent leading of the various entities under the Council. We cannot end without remembering our dear friend Elisa Ruiz Diaz of Paraguay, who passed away quite suddenly as she was chairing the Permanent Council. Elisa was a wonderful woman, and she took every one of the causes of this organization as one of her own. And that is why, paying tribute to that illustrious Paraguayan citizen and her very important contributions, we have decided that the room of the Secretary General in headquarters be called after her. I thank very much all of the entities and the organisms of this body for having helped us so much, and thanks also to civil society, to other social actors, and everyone here. The thanks that I express, of course, go also to the Assistant Secretary General and the entire staff of this organization. Let me end with very special thanks to you, Mr. President, and the delegations that have honored me with allowing me to chair the General Committee of this Assembly. I thank you most kindly. Thank you, Ambassador Fiallo, for the presentation of your very far-reaching report. We have the various draft resolutions that have been passed up by the Permanent Council for consideration by the General Committee. And all of that say, we take note of this annual report of the Permanent Council and proceed to consider the various draft resolutions that are included in the document 56/21, the draft resolution on the priority role of the Organization of American States, the development of telecommunications and communications technology, and communication through the Inter-American Commission on Telecommunications. We also look to another approved draft resolution on the TICs in rural and underattended areas, the draft resolution on the increase and strengthening of the participation of civil society and social actors in the activities of the Organization of American States and in the summits process of the Americas. Further, the draft resolution, support and follow-up on the summit process in the Americas, draft resolution, fostering hemispheric initiatives in the area of rural development and the promotion of resilience, draft resolution on the promotion of voluntarism in the hemisphere to fight disasters and poverty, known as the White Helmet Initiative, draft resolution on the corporate Inter-American Initiative, also the multidimensional focus for the Americas, draft resolution on international law, draft resolution on the strengthening of democracy, and draft resolution on the program budget of the organization for 2022. If there are no objections, we now declare the aforementioned draft resolutions approved. The delegation of Colombia has the floor. Thank you very much, President of the General Assembly. The delegation of Colombia wishes to read out the statement on the situation in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. The ministers of foreign affairs and heads of delegation of Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Paraguay, the United States, at the 51st General Assembly of the Organization of American States, reaffirm their commitment to the principles enshrined both in the Charter of the Organization of American States as well as in the American Democratic Charter regarding the strengthening of democratic institutions in member states. Reaffirm likewise the right to democracy in the peoples of the Americas and their governments, and to defend and promote it pursuant to Article 1 of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. Recall that the essential elements of representative democracy include a respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, access to power and its exercise under the rule of law, a celebration of periodic, free, fair, and just elections based on universal suffrage, secret ballots as an expression of the sovereignty of the people, the pluripartite representation of the people, and the independence of and independently from legal powers. Reiterate our commitment to the resolutions 2963, 2924, 34, and 11, 64, 11, 66, 11, 43, 1117, 1078. These are resolutions of the Permanent Council. And recall that through resolutions 1117 of the 10th of January 2019 and 1164 of the 9th of December of 2020, it was resolved not to recognize the results of the presidential and parliamentary elections that were held in Venezuela on the 20th of May 2018 and 6th December 2019, respectively, inasmuch as we consider them fraudulent. They were neither free nor fair nor transparent and had no credible international observers. Express their concern, their profound concern at the continual erosion of the democratic, political, social, economic, humanitarian, and security powers in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, deeply aggravated by COVID-19, and call on the immediate and full application of the principles that have been enshrined in the declarations of the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights and the Human Rights Commission at the UN. Take note of the independent group that has looked at the facts before the UN regarding the situation in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, which, based on very detailed information, has found credible reason to believe that crimes against humanity have been carried out in that country. And these were brought before the International Criminal Court on December 3rd, at which point the preliminary phase of the examination in Venezuela has been concluded, and the examination of the purported crimes against humanity carried out in 2017 in Venezuela shall now proceed in proceedings with the Statute of Rome. Demand the immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners, that there be a respect for the independence of parties, of the right to expression, freedom of expression, freedom to assembly, and the exercise of fundamental freedoms and basic human rights. Reiterates its ongoing, very deep concern at the humanitarian greatest exodus in the history of Latin America as people are fleeing the Bolivian Republic. We support also the committee that is being meeting in the city of Mexico under the aegis of the Kingdom of Norway, and express our hope that these investigations will restore democracy and offer an integral solution, finally, to the very grave economic, social, political, and humanitarian crisis that has afflicted Venezuela, and finally, the hope that free, fair, transparent elections may be held again under international credible observation. Exhort the international community, therefore, to continue operating in the hope for an urgent, peaceful, and lasting solution to the extraordinarily grave crisis that afflicts Venezuela. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Londoño. We've taken note. Nicaragua has asked for the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This delegation would like to request the inclusion of the following footnote in the draft resolution entitled Promotion of Hemispheric Security, a Multidimensional Approach, under item 6, Concerns and Regional Security Issues, under paragraph A, Concerned in Matters of Security of the Member States of SICA. And the footnote would read as follows. Under the framework of the Inter-American Integration System, SICA, and the Security Commission of Central America, CSC, and according to its rules of procedure, decisions are taken by consensus, inter alia, that pertaining to the review and updating of the security strategy of Central America, ESCA. To date, the Security Commission of Central America has not considered nor agreed to the participation of the OAS General Secretariat nor the Inter-American Defense Board in the review and update process for that strategy. Thank you very much. Thank you. We shall take note of your statement. Ambassador Washington Abdallah of Uruguay has asked for the floor. You have the floor, Ambassador. Thank you, sir. The statement that has just been read on the situation in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela by our dear Colombian friends, if I understood correctly, we would like to be co-sponsors, co-signers of this statement. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. We take note of your comments. As you can see, the report that has been presented and the recently approved documents demonstrate the very complex work done by the Permanent Council over the last few months. And it is for this reason, and on behalf of the General Assembly, that I would like to publicly acknowledge the permanent representatives of the member states for their invaluable contributions to furthering the hemispheric agenda. And I would like to express particular recognition to the permanent representatives of Jamaica, Antigua and Barbuda, Panama, Uruguay, Peru, and the Dominican Republic for their effort, for their devotion and commitment to carrying out the function of President of the Permanent Council, as well as our dear colleague and friend, Ambassador Lisa Ruiz Diaz, Permanent Representative of Paraguay, who chaired the work of the Permanent Council until the date of her death. Before proceeding on to the next item, I would like to remind the delegations that the draft declaration on the issue of the Malvinas or the Faulkner Islands will be considered at the General Assembly 4th session. Next, we now will listen to the presentation of the chair of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, CD, Ambassador Audrey Marks, the permanent representative of Jamaica to the OAS. Ambassador Marks, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, foreign ministers, colleague permanent representatives, other high-level officials and delegates, good afternoon. Chair, allow me to begin by congratulating your government, the government of Guatemala, for hosting of this year's General Assembly, and join with others in extending best wishes for a productive meeting. I'm deeply honored to represent the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, CD, and to present its annual report, CD/Doc 330/21, Rev 1, to this 51st General Assembly, as well as a draft resolution on advancing hemispheric initiatives on integral development, promoting resilience, document CD/Doc 334/21, Revision 1. Draft resolution, coordination of volunteers in the hemisphere in response to disasters and the fight against hunger and poverty White Helmets Initiative, document CD/337/21, Revision 1, which was presented by the Republic of Argentina with the sponsorship of Antigua and Barbuda, Canada, Chile, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, the Dominican Republic, the United States, and Uruguay. And draft resolution, draft Inter-American Business Charter, document CD/Doc 338/21, presented by Colombia. Chair, as we gather virtually once again within this august body, we are acutely mindful of the dire challenges facing our region. Reports indicate that in 2020, Latin America and the Caribbean experienced the worst crisis in its recorded history and the sharpest economic contraction in the developing world. Data indicates that contraction of investments relative to GDP was greater in Latin America and the Caribbean than in any other developing region. Chair, the numbers for our region are daunting. 44.1 million people are unemployed. Poverty has increased from 185.5 million to 209 million, with extreme poverty increasing by 8 million. These numbers bring into sharp focus the need for us to redouble our work in finding urgent solutions to this crisis, or risk seeing the region set back for more than a decade, with which most predict. Within the context of the OAS, the numbers also indicate that now more than ever, we need to bolster our work within the Inter-American Council for Integral Development. Distinguished ministers, the issues of development are by nature complex, as each of us are at varying places in our journey. What is clear, however, is that by working together to address common challenges, we can accelerate recovery, if only by not reinventing the wheel. Never before has cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships been more urgent, and never before has action from the OAS been more necessary. We need an all-hands-on-deck approach to this crisis. Allow me to refer to the language of the OAS Charter, which states that the Organization of American States, in order to put into practice the principles on which it is founded and to fulfill its regional obligations under the Charter of the United Nations, proclaims to promote by cooperative action their economic, social, and cultural development, and to eradicate poverty, which constitutes an obstacle to full democratic development of the peoples of the hemisphere. Chair, this clearly demonstrates the vision of the founders in giving to CD a role that underpins the organization's core purpose and places it at the center of development efforts in the region and, by extension, its recovery from the pandemic. It is imperative, therefore, that as we chart our path towards recovery from this pandemic, we continue to create an enabling environment within the OAS to develop the equitable, prosperous, democratic, and safe societies that our citizens demand. Distinguished ministers, there's no doubt that the pandemic has stymied our progress towards the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Development Agenda. Yet the crisis presents us with an opportunity to rethink and recreate our development models, which have for too long left too many behind. Consider, for example, the new opportunities presented by the new trend in remote work. It means that companies will more aggressively recruit talent globally. New business models have emerged, as are the opportunities in digital economy, adoption of automation, artificial intelligence, virtual and augmented reality. Our ability to quickly adapt and to quickly empower our people, particularly our young people, to become global citizens capable of embracing these new realities is fundamental to our economic recovery. The Inter-American Council for Integral Development is our vehicle for coherent, focused dialogue and measurable action for our work in that regard, with its long track record of promoting partnerships for development in the Americas. Under my leadership and that of my esteemed colleague, Ambassador Louis Cordero of Honduras during this period, CD engaged member states on some of the most urgent development issues confronting our region at this time: climate financing, food security and nutrition, education and human development, national energy transition as an engine for recovery, improving youth skills for Industry 4.0, and science for decision making, among others. I'm very happy to usher in a new approach to CD meetings, moving beyond just discussions to action between member states and some of the foremost minds in the world to find concrete solutions and opportunities for cooperation and partnerships. This year, CD will host 5 ministerials and high meetings and meetings of high authorities to date. The 21st meeting of the Inter-American Conference of Ministers of Labor, which was held on the 23rd and 24th of September, hosted by Argentina, and which adopted the Declaration of Buenos Aires, with member states pledging to prioritize action on the future of work the platform economy, expanding social protection coverage, reinforcing social dialogue, and upholding occupational health and safety. The 25th Congress of the Ministers of Tourism, hosted by Paraguay on October 6th, which adopted the Declaration of Paraguay on rebuilding and reconstructing the tourism post-COVID and establishing a framework for action and tourism recovery in the hemisphere. The meeting also launched the Indigenous Tourism Collaborative, a partnership between indigenous tourism leaders across the hemisphere, the United States Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the George Washington University Tourism Institute to strengthen the leadership of indigenous communities in the tourism sector. In addition, we had the 12th regular meeting of the Inter-American Committee on Ports, hosted by Argentina, the 11th America's Competitiveness Forum, hosted by Ecuador, and the 7th Inter-American Dialogue of High-Level MSME Authorities, hosted by Chile. Chair, over the past 5 months, I've witnessed firsthand the capacity of CEDI and the Secretariat for Integral Development, CEDI, to accelerate progress on development in our region. Recognizing the diminished fiscal space in which we have to maneuver, CEDI has pursued partnerships with major international and regional actors such as IBM, Amazon, Facebook, the IDB, the GEF, the Swiss Agency for Development Corporation, the Internet Society, the Space Foundation, the U.S. Department of Commerce, and leading academic institutions like Texas A&M, University of California, Riverside, University of Chicago, Duke University, and many others with programs in women's economic empowerment, digital transformation, STEM teacher training, water and sanitation, the commercialization and transfer of technology, digitalization of small businesses, energy transition, and next month, CEDI will launch the first youth academy on transformative technologies in the Americas at the Ministerial on Science and Technology under the chairmanship of Jamaica. Among these eye-opening statistics that I discovered during my tenure as chair is the CEDI's Foreign Trade Information System. It just reached a milestone of 237 million hits in 10 years, a valuable resource for trade officials across our region. Last year, 117,000 teachers were trained on the CEDI's Inter-American Teacher Education Network program. These are just a few of the examples of the contributions the Secretariat and its governing body, CEDI, are making to our region. Time does not permit me to highlight the many activities, programs, and projects of the CEDI and CEDI. And so I'm pleased to inform that more information is available in the detailed written report circulated to member states as part of the documents for this meeting. Suffice to say that while a lot of work has been done, there remains much more to do. Our work in pursuit of improving the lives and livelihoods of the people of the region persists. It is challenging work, but seeing the transformative impact we have been able to achieve with limited resources is fulfilling. I extend my appreciation to the chairs of the various CEDI organs for their support of the work carried out this past year. I especially recognize the hard work and dedication of Executive Secretary Kim Osborne and offer my appreciation for her leadership and the commitment of her staff. Their work has enabled this body to implement the mandates of member states and respond to the emerging needs of our people, particularly at this difficult moment in our history. To conclude, Chair, I believe that the overarching challenge for our region is how to rethink, reshape, and reconstruct more resilient societies and economies that can expand opportunities for all. From our indigenous communities to micro, small, and medium enterprises, our creative industries, our farmers and producers, and many others within this vast socio-economic system. We can and we must work together if we truly want to change the socio-economic course of this region, which we call home. The OAS CEDI presents us with a unique space for focused action towards our recovery from the pandemic. Let us embrace our shared responsibility within this organization. to build a region where we can all be proud to live and work. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mark. Excellent work done by CITI to continue promoting cooperation between member states to support integral development and especially to contribute to reduce poverty. Thank you again.
Thank you.
We will now begin the dialogue of heads of delegation. My apologies, there's a request for the floor. The delegation of Colombia, Vice Minister, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the government of President Iván Duque, I would like to take this opportunity for highlighting the adoption of the Inter-American Business Charter, which is one of the areas of integral development that this General Assembly will be delivering for a renewed America. It's important to recall that this initiative was proposed by President Iván Duque at the 12th Business Forum of the Americas held in 2019 for the purpose of promoting the role of the private initiative as an engine for development and economic growth in the region. With a document now of a political status, the states of the America are reaffirming the fundamental role the business sector has in establishing stable, peaceful environments and bringing about economic growth and sustainable development for the region. In this document that we're adopting today, we are reiterating the importance of having member states develop a favorable environment for growth, innovation, business, where business can operate under public policies that promote transparency, education, and business ethics, respect for human rights, environmental sustainability, corporate responsibility, and shared values with their people. We believe that micro, small, and medium-sized businesses are also catalysts for sustainable development and economic growth of states, and thus they are the key axis, the key focus of this business charter. Through this document, the member states reaffirm their commitment to develop policies aimed at increasing productivity and competitiveness amongst businesses, as well as giving them access to financing. As proposed by Colombia and the General Assembly of 2019, which was held in Medellin, these initiatives allow us to advance the idea of innovating to strengthen hemispheric multilateralism. This business charter is a key demonstration of the ability the OAS has to generate within the inter-American system partnerships that help attain sustainable development goals and build a consensus that would lead to reactivating our economies from a renewal and strengthened perspective. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vice Minister Londoño. Now we shall begin the dialogue of heads of delegation under the theme Towards Renewal in the Americas, a theme proposed by Guatemala for this 51st regular session of the General Assembly. And I would like to remind delegations that in accordance with the agreements we have and procedures we have agreed to, we will call on delegates through the Kudo platform, and the order of precedence has already been determined by lottery, and those delegations that wish to submit pre-recorded presentations, they will be shown following the same order of precedence. I also would like to inform the hall that the delegations of Barbados and Canada agreed amongst themselves to switch their turn in the order of precedence. So the turn of Canada will come immediately after the Bahamas, and Barbados will follow Brazil. I also would like to remind you that the presentations should not exceed 6 minutes per delegation, so that the time allotted for this item in the agenda will allow for the participation of all delegations. In this regard, it is a pleasure now for me to call on the head of the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda, Ambassador Sir Ronald Sanders. You have the floor, sir.
Ambassador Sanders, could you please request the floor? Ambassador Sanders?
Ambassador Sanders, you have been called on.
Perfect, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I regret I'm not quite sure why I'm being asked to speak. I mean, I'm delighted to have the floor, but I'm not sure why.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have already started the dialogue between, and we have determined the order, and you are the first one to speak in the list that we have.
Well, in that case, Mr. President, let me take the opportunity, though I did not anticipate, I didn't ask for the floor to speak, but I will do so in the interest of time, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador.
And you will forgive me because I'm going to speak extemporaneously, which means that what you will hear comes from my heart. But I have to first of all say that the last 18 months of our existence as a world community has been very difficult for everyone. But it has been particularly difficult for our hemisphere. We have had a disproportionate number of deaths, and in addition to that, we have had a disproportionate effect upon the economies of our countries. That has happened, Mr. President, particularly in the smaller islands of the Caribbean, where their resources are constrained, where there are remote communities, where they import the inflation of the countries with which they trade. They faced, particularly the tourism-dependent islands, a drop in their unemployment from as much as 50% of the population. As high as 30% of the gross domestic product of those countries disappeared overnight. Right now, we are all struggling. And there has never been a time in the contemporary history of the world in which there has been a greater need for solidarity, for cooperation, and for collaboration. I said so in my opening remarks, Mr. Chairman, and I heard them repeated just now by the distinguished Ambassador of Jamaica, Ambassador Audrey Marks, in presenting the report of the Integral Development Secretariat. These are real problems and we face them. If we are to come out of this post-COVID period with democratic institutions and democracy still intact, then larger countries in our hemisphere have to understand that smaller countries need help to do so. We are faced with extremely difficult circumstances, and it cannot be business as usual. The restrictions on concessionary finance, which our countries need in order to recover from this catastrophe, must be taken into account. And we are not asking for this because we feel that we are a charity case and that countries must give us their money. We are asking for this because if we do not recover from the economic circumstances in which we are now placed, we will find it difficult to maintain the institutions of democracy to which we are all committed. More than that, with economic decline will come an expansion of poverty. And with poverty will come an increase in unemployment. And with that will come an increase in crime. And that crime will gravitate toward organized crime in areas of money laundering, drug trafficking, all of the global threats with which the world is now faced. But more than that, we will see too an expansion in the number of refugees coming from countries which have not had traditional refugees. Countries like my own, where people have never left because they are economic refugees. But these circumstances are difficult, and all of us have an obligation to try to stop illegal migration, the hardship that causes refugees to exist. So, Mr. Chairman, while our organization focuses on human rights, democracy, we must also recognize that development is an important pillar of our work. And without attention to that development, we cannot guarantee security. And if we cannot guarantee security, then it becomes a threat to our entire hemisphere. I have nothing further to say than that, Mr. Chairman, except one further word. I would like to thank the Secretary General, Luis Almagro, for the statements he has been making in advocating the need for equitable distribution of vaccines, which is a critical matter to our countries, and also for the remarks that he's made on the threat that climate change poses to our countries. These are very important statements coming from the head of an international institutions. And he has been the first head of an international institution who has spoken up for reparations for the effects of slavery and genocide in our hemisphere. We would like to express our thanks at this General Assembly to him for taking that position. I thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will take up no further time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sanders. We will continue with alphabetical order.
Now, I call on the delegation of Argentina, His Excellency Foreign Affairs Minister Santiago Andrés Cafiero. Mr. Chairman of the General Assembly, Mr. Secretary General, heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, I have the honor of participating in this General Assembly, which is the best moment to reaffirm our Pan-American vocation and our commitment to the founding principles of this organization. The COVID-19 pandemic has had specific impact in our region, making much more visible, like never before, the structural inequalities of our societies and presenting clear challenges to work together to strengthen our health systems, provide access to vaccinations and medication, and rebuild our economies, giving priority to reweaving our social fabric is a dignified task. It did not only show our structural inequalities, but it also demonstrated that a state that implements public policies to reorganize the social life of our peoples by focusing more on human and equal relations is a better solution. We now need to deal with this pandemic through the health rebuilding as well as economic and social rebuilding, which helps us in our planet. The Pope in his encyclical said, we need renewed universal solidarity. At the OAS, we now need to recover our ability to reach consensual solutions based on respect for sovereignty and equality of member states. We must clear away the recent history of moving away from our foundations by supporting the interruption of democratic order as occurred in Bolivia. Racism, affected the thinking of many, and the essence of our organization is to preserve cooperation with respect and solidarity, with a permanent belief in dialogue. If this organization had remained faithful to its guiding and founding principles, we wouldn't have to be facing this shameful page in our history. The essence of the rule of law should be the very essence of this organization. We should guarantee election of governors by free and transparent regular elections, and it is up to each one of us to strengthen our own democratic institutions as established in Article 3, subparagraph E of the Charter of the OAS. Every state has a right to elect without external interference its economic, social, political structure and organize itself in the best way possible, and has the duty to not intervene in the affairs of another state. That is consistent with the principle of non-intervention. That is the very root of our birth as an American states, and it represents an unwavering position for our foreign policy. Our Argentines abiding by this in the Drago Doctrine by those who preceded me in this position in 1902, 1903, enshrined forbidding intervention by armed forces to collect public debt, or the Calvo Doctrine, which stated that judicial interruption should not occur in the internal affairs of a state. Also, the Sabela Dramas Treaty, who was an Argentine Nobel Prize winner, stated in 1933 the principle of non-intervention in the region. Also, the additional protocol on non-intervention held here in Buenos Aires in 1936 stated that it was inadmissible to have intervention in the internal affairs of a state under the Inter-American Framework, which gave rise to the recognition of these principles within the OAS Charter, Article 2, subparagraph B, which is to promote and consolidate representative democracy with respect to the principle of non-intervention. Furthermore, the recourse to sanctions that harm the stability and peaceful coexistence of societies is not a recourse. This only harms the enjoyment of basic rights by the most vulnerable populations. Article 20 of the OAS Charter states that regional experiences should not lead to intervention, and that non-intervention can coexist with dialogue. That's what the Contadora group demonstrated when they looked at the prevailing situation in Central America in the 80s, which threatened to destabilize the whole region. And that process was fundamental to bringing about peace and democracy in the region, fully respecting the principle of non-intervention in its 1983 declaration and in the peace agreement in Central America in 1986. So it's very clear that respect for non-intervention, together with dialogue between our governments, cannot ignore a violation of human rights, particularly political rights, when you have elections where political prisoners cannot be accepted. We also cannot ignore the requirement to preserve democratic institutions in the region, as we have committed to do through the Inter-American Democratic Charter. The promotion and protection of human rights is for Argentina a question of a policy of state, and it has been reflected through our active participation in the universal system and the Inter-American human rights system. The policies of justice and the institutions of our democracy. We maintain the values of diversity, inclusion, and commitment to the rights of peoples and groups who are in a vulnerable situation. Argentina believes that the Inter-American human rights system is a key part of this position. For us, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has a special role because of the importance it has in bringing about a return to democracy, and where in its report, the visit in 1979, it reported the violations of human rights perpetrated by the Argentine dictatorship with the forced disappearances. And therefore, it is through this commitment that we have submitted Veronica Gomez to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights as a candidate. Mr. President, Secretary General, heads of delegation, I would like to reaffirm the legitimate rights of sovereignty of the Republic of Argentina over the Malvina Islands, South Georgia and South, and the coastal areas were an integral part of the national territory of Argentina and have been illegally occupied by the United Kingdom for more than 188 years. We regret that in spite of the time elapsed since the approval of the resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations number 20/65, the United Kingdom persists in its activity of disregarding the call for renewing negotiations to resolve this dispute. In fact, the UK has illegally exploited, on a bilateral basis, exploited natural resources, contrary to Resolution 31/49. Also, it has an unjustified military presence in the island. We reaffirm our strong and full position, as demonstrated by every democratic government of Argentina, to fulfill that mandate. And once again, we would like to have it ratified at this assembly. That's what I would like to extend an appreciation from the government, people of Argentina, for the continuous support and solidarity expressed by the member states of this organization on the Malvinas issue, and that this assembly will continue to consider this matter at its next session until the matter is finally resolved. We believe that this organization plays a key role in recovering the principles that are enshrined in our founding documents, both the OAS Charter, as well as the Inter-American Democratic Charter, as well as the Social Charter of the Americas, focus on inter-American solidarity and contributing to progress, to the promotion of cooperation for economic development, and to combat poverty, which are obstacles to the democratic development of our peoples. Our organization should not turn away from our guiding principles, and we must focus on renewing efforts to attain those goals, particularly in these times when we have a battle against the pandemic and the deplorable social and economic consequences. As said President Alberto Fernandez when he spoke at the last General Assembly of the United Nations, out of this triple pandemic of global inequity, climate change, and COVID-19, we will only survive if we have daring leaders, innovative ideas, and concepts that seem as dream today. According to the figures of UNDP, the Latin American region continues to be the second most unequal in the world, and the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean have levels of inequality much higher than other regions that have similar development levels. To combat poverty, particularly the critical poverty, is to fight for democracy. I believe that equality, equity, and social justice are a crucial part of the consolidation of our democratic systems. Indeed, as the Social Charter states, development with equity strengthens democracy and consolidates it. Even though both are independent, they mutually reinforce one another. This is the course our organization should take. And I would like to conclude by recalling General Perón, 3 times president of our country, in his message to the peoples of the world in July of 1947, when he said that we represent a country that, from its very origin, lives freedom and will never have any difference of opinion that will not be resolved through the rule of law, justice, so that civilization does not fail. His views were quite current given what's occurring today, and my country's view towards finding a solution to this very difficult situation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister Cafiero, for your words, and I'd like to remind delegations that in order to stick to our time limit, we have 6 minutes per delegation.
Let's see.
Colleague foreign ministers, Secretary General and the Assistant Secretary General, ambassadors and other diplomatic representatives. Mr. President, again, today's General Assembly marks the second time that the meeting of this organization's principal organ is being held virtually. And I therefore want to take this opportunity to thank the government of Guatemala for hosting this General Assembly, despite it not being in person. Your hosting during these times of radical uncertainty is a testament to the Americas' collective ability to respond and adapt to the challenges before us. So thank you very much. The theme of the General Assembly is towards renewal in the Americas, and it's especially fitting for my country. It's certainly a time of renewal for the Bahamas. Almost 60 days ago, Bahamians took to the polls and voted in a new government, continuing the country's 292-year history of parliamentary democracy. The election was free and fair and resulted in an immediate and peaceful transition to the new administration. Prime Minister the Honorable Philip Davis is committed to further strengthening democracy by pursuing the principles of good governance and transparency in partnership with the Bahamian people. The Davis administration is also committed to creating a greater Bahamian footprint abroad by enhancing our visibility and participation in the international arena. The Prime Minister's cabinet encompasses not only a variety of political and professional experiences, but also includes a record number of women. Despite the change of administration, the organization's pillars of human rights, democracy, integral development, and multidimensional security remain of paramount importance to the Bahamas. To the date, all of this, Mr. President, as we begin to emerge from one of the most challenging periods in the history of the Bahamas. Of course, the Bahamas is no stranger to the issue of climate change. The Hurricane Dorian in 2019 was we were the third most affected country, and we experienced hurricanes in 2015, 2016, and 2017. So plainly put, climate change presents an existential threat to the country. Warming oceans will make more intense storms and more Hurricane Dorians. And then, if that were not enough, after Hurricane Dorian, the COVID pandemic 19 struck. And perhaps just as harrowing as the coronavirus is the inability to satisfy the need for vaccines to combat it. We express our gratitude to countries that have contributed vaccines and to the facilitators of and donors to COVAX, and we acknowledge that more must be done. The speed at which the coronavirus spread from country to country is proof of the interconnectedness of our world, a world in which there's simply no room for vaccine nationalism. The Bahamas believes, as our forebears did when crafting the charter of the organization, that the OAS has an indispensable role to play in supporting integral development. For many small member states like the Bahamas, the OAS is one of the few global institutions where there is broad accessibility to technical assistance, particularly for development projects. This is why we express our continued support for the Development Cooperation Fund, the organization's only source of funding available directly to member states for their national priorities. We are pleased to be recipients of DCF's latest cycle of funding, which will complement our pandemic recovery efforts. From issues of climate change to social equality to economic growth, we believe that the OAS has the convening power and the political legitimacy to champion development issues and coordinate purposeful action. Mr. President, we're an island country, and the Bahamas is comprised of 700 islands and keys, scattered over 100,000 square miles in the Atlantic. This means that infrastructure and services have to be established and maintained on numerous islands, a huge task that cannot be completed without financing assistance. The complexities of the impacts of environmental, economic, social, and now public health shocks mean that access to affordable development financing will be even more integral to the success of countries like mine. Year after year, this delegation reiterates the need for broadening and modernizing of the development financing indicators used to assess development level and development needs. We have stated and will continue to argue that GDP per capita should not be the primary determinant for international economic assistance or concessional access to development financing. That metric is flawed and does not properly reflect the economic realities of our citizens. So the last 2 years have laid bare our inherent vulnerabilities as a country, a region, a world. The Bahamas stands firm in its belief in the power of multilateralism to address common challenges. In closing, I recall the words of the Bahamas' first Prime Minister, Sir Lyndon Pindling, at the 22nd regular session of the General Assembly hosted in my country's capital in 1992. There are myriad problems and obstacles that we have confronted and will continue to face, both individually and collectively, as we traverse the road that we believe will lead inexorably toward true and lasting democracy and peace and security for the peoples of the Americas. What we therefore do at the national level and what we do in this organization must always hark back to the people from whom we get our mandate and without whose guidance all our efforts will be meaningless. Mr. President, may we strive for our efforts never to be meaningless as we work toward renewal in the Americas. And I thank you very much, and I'm happy to rejoin you in this forum. Blessings to you all.
Thank you very much, the Foreign Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I just wanted to point out quickly to St. Kitts and Nevis, which is asking for the floor, that the decision had been made that countries will be allowed to speak alphabetically. That means that St. Kitts and Nevis is somewhere down the line of speakers. I apologize for that, but that was the rule that was made. Now, Barbados, which should have been the next speaker, has swapped its place with Canada. And on that basis, I give the floor now to the distinguished Foreign Minister of Canada, Melanie Joly. You have the floor, Minister.
Chers collègues, dear colleagues, it is an honor to be with you to this General Assembly. Today is Remembrance Day in Canada, and we honor the loss of brave Canadians who defended our values, freedom, and made so many sacrifices. Alors aujourd'hui, c'est le jour du souvenir et on se souvient. As Canada's new Foreign Affairs Minister, I intend to conduct our international affairs with humility and audacity. Humility because Canada recognizes that there's so much work to be done at home and in our hemisphere, and we only succeed by working together. And audacity because we must act boldly to end the pandemic, uphold democracy, and tackle climate change, the overarching threat of our times. The pandemic has upended our lives and led to great losses. It has also exacerbated fundamental fault lines and challenges in our society, undermining our ability to make progress. But there is a way forward, and now is the time to act. Canada will continue to stand with its hemispheric partners. We have already donated over $57 million to the Pan American Health Organization for vulnerable populations throughout the hemisphere, and we have donated more than 2.4 million vaccine doses in the region bilaterally and through COVAX. Moving forward, recovery is an opportunity not just to go back to normal, but really to do better. Les droits humains sont au cœur de notre société et de notre engagement dans la région. Collectivement,
Human rights, of course, are at the heart of what we believe in our society and in our region. And of course, we think of the rights of women, the LGBTQ community. The interpreter regrets the speaker is breaking up. I can only hear very little, if nothing at all, that she's saying at this point. We've lost the speaker. Cannot hear Canada. We understand we need to work very closely in partnership with the original peoples, with the First Nations.
You have to turn off your, go to original audio in your interpretation.
thank you so much. Done, so I can continue and make sure that we can speak in both official languages of Canada. Donc, le phénomène du travail des proches aidants, très souvent non.
Of course, all of this work has been exacerbated during the pandemic, and we have paid particular attention to reproductive and health services, the access of women to work. The leadership of women is, of course, very, very important, is indeed essential to our recovery. And everything we do, we must work in partnership with First Nations, with autochthonous peoples for reconciliation and lasting economic recovery. We think everyone is entitled to an economic recovery, and inclusion is absolutely essential.
American Democratic Charter. It was a groundbreaking vision anchored in the principles of democracy. 20 years later, we should acknowledge the progress made, as well as the significant challenges that remain. We must reaffirm our shared commitment to this democratic vision. As governments, our first role must be to build our citizens' trust in governance institutions that are meant to protect them and uphold their rights. We must boldly act and have the chance to genuinely listen and respond to the needs of all our citizens. We must seize this chance to regain their trust and emerge stronger. At the same time, and to be clear, we're seeing worrying trends in our neighborhood. Canada is deeply troubled by what just happened in Nicaragua. These were not free and fair elections. By imprisoning opposition leaders, journalists, and civil society members, the regime of Daniel Ortega has taken Nicaragua out of the family of democracies in the hemisphere. We cannot stand by and watch. We must act. Here, collectively among the Organization of American States. Nicaraguans want a just, democratic future. Canada stands strongly with them, and we call on all OAS members to join us. Similarly, Venezuela shows us what happened when democracy is denied, the rule of law is abandoned, and human rights are violated. Canada is very concerned about the plight of Venezuelans, both inside and outside of the country. We're committed to international efforts to ensure they receive the assistance they need. We strongly support the Norway-mediated negotiation process and encourage the de facto government to return to the table. Canada is also concerned about the challenging security situation in Haiti, and we are committed to a stable, prosperous, and secure Haiti. Nous sommes préoccupés par la situation qui prévaut en Haïti et nous sommes là pour soutenir la.
We are indeed very concerned about the prevailing situation in Haiti and the security of Haitian citizens.
Is acceptable to many stakeholders, political actors, private sector, and civil society. Enfin, nous devons unir nos forces pour nous attaquer aux causes et aux conséquences des changements climatiques. Il s'agit de la plus grande menace à long terme.
Finally, we must pull together for our fight against climate change, for the planet, and we understand that the low-lying Caribbean islands are in particular risk.
Which we co-convened with Mexico. The path to pandemic recovery is a long one. Canada remains committed to work constructively with our OAS partners. Let us work together to achieve renewal in the Americas. The OAS is greater than the sum of its parts, and we're stronger together. Merci, thank you, gracias, obrigada, and thank you also for the ones that, for anybody that has helped me to deal with the technical issues.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Minister Joly from Canada. La representación de Nicaragua ha pedido la palabra. Entenderíamos.
The Nicaraguan delegation has asked for the floor. We have established an order of speakers, and we shall maintain it. We, of course, do recognize the right to reply, but that shall be granted at the end of the speakers list so that that order will be respected. I trust that Nicaragua will do the same. And we shall continue, therefore, ladies and gentlemen.
Excellency Eamon Courtney.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Fellow foreign ministers, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, greetings. This General Assembly, with the benefit of technology, meets separately but connected by the internet. This is perhaps fitting. Why? Because the theme for the General Assembly is towards renewal in the Americas. Implicit in this theme is that all is not well in the Americas and that renewal is required. Indeed, Mr. Chairman, all is not well. In 1948, when the OAS Charter was signed, the countries of the hemisphere then committed to noble objectives. The Charter's preamble states that the signatories were convinced that the historic mission of America is to offer people a land of liberty and a favorable environment for the development of their personality and the realization of their aspirations. The primary goal of the historic mission was the desire of the American peoples to live together in peace and, through their mutual understanding and respect for the sovereignty of each one, to provide for the betterment of all in independence, in equality, and under law. That grand mission remains the same 73 years later. This ambitious objective to build a just Americas imbues our hearts and minds and binds us together as we work in joint enterprise. As we seek renewal, we must be guided by the 8 essential purposes set out in Article 2 of the Charter. To do otherwise would be to betray our peoples. 20 years after the adoption of the Inter-American Democratic Charter, democracy appears to be in retreat across our hemisphere. In the oldest democracies and the youngest, the fires of populism and authoritarianism burn bright. Geopolitical tensions have undermined cooperation. The pursuit of hegemonic objectives has led to isolation, humanitarian crises, and hardship, not just for governments, but also for millions of people in our hemisphere. The willingness to readily set aside norms and principles of international law has caused deep distrust and divisions. Mr. President, can we sincerely seek to audit elections and pronounce on the legitimacy of governments when we tolerate within this meeting the farce of an unelected impostor representing no country? At this difficult time, our hemisphere will remain divided unless we are guided by the Charter, which enjoins all of us to promote and consolidate representative democracy with due respect for the principle of non-intervention. As we work to resolve the democratic challenges, we will only find lasting solutions if we give life to this article of faith. Colleagues, the facts on COVID-19 are gruesome. According to PAHO, 2.3 million citizens in the Americas have died. That is 25% of the worldwide total. Of the 250 million cases worldwide, 94.4 million have been confirmed in the Americas. That is 20% of the worldwide total. PAHO reports that only 44% of us are fully vaccinated. That's less than half our citizens. Some countries have achieved herd immunity with 75% of their populations fully vaccinated, whereas others have not yet been able to vaccinate 20% of their populations. Against this dismal picture, we must juxtapose the continued vaccine hoarding and inequitable distribution of vaccines. It is regrettable that even today, member states of the OAS continue to hoard vaccines. The World Health Organization has said, and I quote, "This is not just unfair, it is not just immoral, it is prolonging the pandemic and it is resulting in people dying." End of quote. We are compelled, Mr. President, to remind ourselves that our Charter proclaims as an essential purpose our solemn commitment to promote by cooperative action our economic, social, and cultural development. We must, as an absolute imperative, renew this enduring obligation of cooperative action and act on it in the name of vaccine justice. Too many have died who should have lived. Where, we ask, is our moral duty to humanity? The concatenation of COVID-19 and the devastating impacts of climate change has produced unprecedented socioeconomic crisis. ECLAC has warned us in stark language. As the pandemic spreads across the region, its nature as a health, economic, and social crisis is increasingly evident. The extent and duration of its effects, although still too uncertain to quantify, are becoming clearer. It will result in the region's worst economic and social crisis in decades, with damaging effects on employment, the fight against poverty, and the reduction of inequality. End of quote. This is compounded by the continuing impact of climate change. Many of our nations are deeply indebted. Why? Because much of us need to constantly rebuild and repair vital infrastructure after annual weather phenomena made more destructive by climate change. Colleagues, there are economies, societies, and specific socio-economic groups within the region whose production structures and consumption patterns leave a large carbon footprint, and others that are highly vulnerable to all sorts of adverse impacts of climate change. This situation is undermining the foundations of the region's economic buoyancy and social cohesion. Mr. President, there is no mystery. The science is clear. The actions to be taken, the measures to be urgently implemented are well known. But our representatives are huddled in Glasgow in the waning hours of COP26. They are confronted with a historic choice: to allow the planet to continue its slow death or to take decisive action to save it. Regrettably, it seems that Belizeans and others will be condemned to live with more frequent and stronger hurricanes and floods, longer droughts, a continued rise of the sea levels, the slow death of our World Heritage Belize Barrier Reef, more ferocious fires in our carbon sequestering forests, lack of access to affordable financing or compensation for loss and damage to our environment. Mr. President, simply put, this is environmental terrorism, a crime against the environment for which we must be compensated. We ask ourselves, why must there be a renewal of the Americas? Well, the facts speak loudly to all who want to listen. The hemisphere's economies are expected to decline by 7.7% of GDP. The extreme poverty rate is 12.5%, and the poverty rate is a dismal 33.7%. It is estimated that the total number of poor people rose to 209 million at the end of 2020, 22 million more than in 2019. Of that total, 78 million people found themselves living in extreme poverty, 8 million more than in 2019. Colleagues, the urgency and depth of the human crisis demands solidarity. We call on the OAS to lead. The OAS must design and implement transformative and catalytic initiatives to address climate change in the Americas. We must do this together. We need the OAS to orient its development programming more effectively to scaling climate adaptation projects in the hemisphere. If we fail, we will see an inevitable increase in migration. People are moving to avoid poverty and crime, to escape political instability and weather-related disasters. They seek to satisfy their basic needs and to live in peace. These are basic human rights, but for far too many, elusive hopes. Mr. President, we cannot afford to forget that our Charter commits us irreversibly to eradicate extreme poverty, which constitutes an obstacle to the full democratic development of the peoples of the hemisphere. To this, we must have universal adoption. To achieve this, we must have the universal adoption of a new multi-vulnerability development index. There is no doubt that the OAS is doing good works. Belize salutes the OAS Secretariat and the Friends of Belize and Guatemala for their continued support to the process that will lead to a peaceful settlement of the referendum. But the OAS must do more. In seeking to execute its mandate as the guardian of democracy in the hemisphere, the OAS should focus its attention on supporting healthy and vibrant democracies. We must consolidate democratic frameworks to enhance transparency and accountability and fight corruption. We must leverage hemispheric cooperation and collaboration to support all governments in pursuing their development agendas. We must collectively catalyze hemispheric solutions to the challenges which we all face, such as migration and climate change. Mr. President, the people of Belize, indeed the people of the Americas, from Alert, Canada in the extreme north to Ushuaia, Argentina in the extreme south, have faith that the OAS can deliver on the promise of a better tomorrow. Let us truly commit to our chosen theme, towards renewal in the Americas. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Courtney. La delegación de Nicaragua ha solicitado la palabra. Por favor, tiene usted la palabra.
The delegation of Nicaragua has asked for the floor. You are recognized, Nicaragua. Nicaragua must reject the false statements of the delegate of Canada, who has dared to question the free, fair, and transparent elections that were held last November 7th in my country, and where she alleges that the people of Nicaragua have been violated in their rights. More than 3 million exercised those rights and the rights to sovereignty freely and fairly, while Canada questions the national sovereignty of Nicaragua and doesn't recognize democracy in my country. The entire world has been stupefied to see the results of massacre of children in Canada. More than 150,000 indigenous children were taken from their families and sent to so-called governmental reform houses where they were sexually abused, tortured, and assassinated. Can you possibly speak of democracy without the full participation of original peoples? Can you dare speak of democracy when so much has been done against the indigenous? Let me tell you, Chair, Nicaragua, it stands tall and respects itself. Thank you. Thank you. If you agree with a view to certainly respecting the right to reply, we will save a time at the end of our list of speakers for Nicaragua to reply further. I hope you agree. You will be given that right, but we must continue with our list of speakers, and we hope that everyone else also agrees. And without further ado, I now am pleased to give the floor to the Minister of Bolivia, Rogelio Maita. Maita, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bolivia. Distinguished Ministers of Foreign Affairs, ambassadors, permanent representatives, permanent observers, on behalf of the Bolivian people and on behalf of the government of President Rizarce Corona, I send you a very warm and cordial greeting. We are gathered today in the context of this General Assembly to speak of the basic principles on which we wish to tackle the problems of our hemisphere. And I would beg you to think at this time about the raison d'etre of the OAS. And let us ask ourselves if this organization presently fulfills that basic reason for being. We're not altogether sure. We don't believe that the OAS has been present in the most pressing concerns before us. Now, clearly, the future is always daunting. Nonetheless, sometimes it seems darker or more promising. And unfortunately, the uncertainty at present is the one we all feel the most. We had the scientific capacity to develop enough vaccines, but we have fallen far short of vaccinating the 70% of the population of the world, which is necessary to achieve herd immunity. We don't know whether we need a periodic vaccination against the pandemic or how else to proceed. The pandemic has certainly made it very clear what the fragility of multilateral organizations is, in point of fact, when faced with such a challenge as this. And it seems to us that the much vaunted principles of solidarity and a belief in humanity have been smashed into smithereens. More other than that, we see a sauve qui peut, whoever can get out, save yourself kind of attitude in our attitude towards the pandemic. And alas, far from the solidarity that we wished we might have seen, we've seen the preeminence of the wealthy groups that seek as ever their own prosperity above all. Basic human freedoms have been trampled in the process. The question regarding the patents of these vaccines is a case in point. But as everyone keeps saying, would that we would actually believe it. Unless we are all safe, none of us are. And therefore, in the absence of a truly global vaccination campaign, we are all at risk. Uncertainty also exists because what in fact has occurred is that our economies have been thrown out of kilter, unemployment has skyrocketed, the gap between the wealthy and the poor has grown wider, economic development has been brought to a halt, and the capacity of member states to truly tackle and attain the objectives for development ever seen farther. The action of the World Bank tells us that between 80 and 100 million people between 1919 and 20 have been displaced for economic reasons. That's per World Bank statistics. And while so many live in a condition of food insecurity, great amounts of additional food has been, in fact, garnered. ILO tells us that 205 million additional people will be out of jobs. The interpreter regrets the speaker is speaking in sound conditions that are very, very difficult to interpret. I'm doing the best I can. Those who are part of these efforts are determined to do what we can to ensure that, turning now to climate change, that at least carbon emissions may drop. The most recent report of the Intergovernmental Group on the Experts on Climate Change confirms what we have been saying for our part for 10 years. Without immediate and profound changes at the world level, we will certainly be above an additional 2 degrees centigrade in the coming years. And this level of emissions, which has been tracked by so many people, simply is a parallel to the ongoing injustice of so many people. Those of us who have been ambitious in setting our targets, alas, have not received the help that was promised under the Paris Accord. It would seem that that much vaunted future that will put us in a safer position is looking farther and farther away when it comes to transfer of technology and other assistance that we need. So, Mr. President, in April of 2019, we suffered an abrupt rupture of our constitutional order, a very severe political crisis. A person who was not in the line of succession used strength and violence to push forward. Now, in that crisis, there was an electoral observation mission of the OAS that should have been more effective. We have to state these things because the price that our people paid in terms of death, in terms of injury of all kinds, cannot be forgotten. And so it would appear somehow that all of these central problems, if they're problems that are distant, well, don't matter as much as others. Here in Bolivia, we think that the time has come to give very serious thought to the reason for this organization. It's time that this organization reflect what our people look like and what they believe and what they need. More than ever, we must base ourselves on an agenda that is commonly held by our member states. True respect for the principles of sovereignty and non-interference in domestic matters, the self-determination of peoples without exclusion. Because we say, convinced that every country, every people has the right to determine its own form of government, free from threat and unilateral action against it in a climate of peace and democracy and respect. So, Mr. President, given all of the above and before this august assembly, Bolivia states yet again its unrestricted right to have an access to the ocean through dialogue, through ongoing negotiation on the precepts of the 1 October 2018 statement by the International Court of Justice. We have a right to continue working for our exit to the sea. The responsibility of this generation surely is to entrust the world to the next generation in terms that are safer, more equitable, and more transparent. But it is very clear that we won't get there if we don't find in our depths the courage to stand up for what we should believe as a community and as one. Thank you. Thank you very much, distinguished Minister and esteemed Rogelio. I am now pleased to give the floor to the head of the delegation of Brazil, His Excellency Carlos Alberto Franco França. Minister of State and Foreign Affairs of Brazil. We regret the minister is speaking with a mute mic. Cannot hear the minister. So sorry. You are still muted, sir. Esteemed minister, says the president, we cannot hear you. Your mic is off. Sorry. Afraid not. Not there yet, minister. Wonder if you might use your refresh function on the browser and ask for the floor a little later. That may be the way to go. Refresh and come back at a later time. Let me, says the president, take the opportunity to tell you that we do have at 1:30 another activity that is on our schedule. And so we will hear Brazil, if we can hear Brazil, as our last speaker in this session, and we will continue at 1600 hours, that is 4 p.m., with the rest of the list of speakers. Do we have Brazil connected? The president asks. The minister has just come back. Our technical service assures us. I'm terribly sorry. We still cannot hear the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. Afraid not. You might need, says the technician, change your settings on the mic. Yes, you can be heard now, Minister. Go right ahead. Well, thank you very much for your patience above all. This is the challenge of meeting virtually. I'm afraid that's how it is. But let me begin certainly by congratulating my good friend Pedro Brolo, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Guatemala, on his election to the position of President of this 51st regular session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States. So congratulations to you, and certainly also to Dr. Luis Almagro, the Secretary General of the OAS, and our esteemed Ambassador Nestor Mendes, the Assistant Secretary General. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the government of Brazil, congratulations and deep gratitude to the government of Guatemala for hosting this almost completely virtual General Assembly, the second held in that mode since the onslaught of the pandemic. And great thanks also to Minister Pedro Brolo and his entire team, quite frankly, for the very timely, hard to think of anything more timely than the actual focus of this assembly towards renewal in the Americas. Certainly an ad hoc focus, if ever there was one. We must look for certainly national solutions, and we like to be independent, but I think the penny has dropped, and I hope we're all understanding that going it alone isn't going to get us there. Certainly not in the context of the health crisis, which has generated enormous challenges to sustainable development in the entire hemisphere. In the eyes of Brazil, that cooperation will be ever more effective if we can choose the appropriate means by which, the instruments, the focus by which, the approach by which we can work jointly together. In the case of the OAS, the excellence of this organization is very clear. There are areas in which the OAS really shines. There is in the hemisphere no other organization that is more at the forefront of working for representative democracy and human rights, multidimensional security, and integral development. And for that reason, we must ensure that the charter of the OAS and the Inter-American Democratic Charter be respected. We just commemorated the second anniversary of the latter last September 11th. Now, we continue to face not only new but very ancient challenges to the democratic order and to the objectives that the OAS has stated and that we make ours. It will certainly continue to be a challenge to the organization, but let us understand that those who take pot shots at the organization, quite frankly, don't for an instant scare us. We understand how courageous the management of the OAS has been in the hands of the Secretary General. And please know, sir, that you may count on Brazil to stand by you to defend the principles and the values of democracy that we share and believe firmly. We understand, too, that some of the principal challenges that we face in the region have to be looked at collectively. The crisis that has assailed Venezuela and what will need to be done to rebuild that democracy in a state of law and rule of law, respect for human rights, social protection, and the dismantling of the unbelievably powerful criminal gangs that are running that country. That will be essential for the entire hemisphere, not just for Venezuela. And by the way, until we find a solution to Venezuela, we will continue to have to face the tremendous, and today, by the way, I'm talking about almost 6 million, let me repeat, 6 million Venezuelan refugees that have had to flee. Brazil will continue to do everything it can to offer social integration, economic support to those Venezuelans that come seeking refuge in our country. But the scenario is very difficult. And here we pay tribute to the President-elect Juan Guaido in his search for a way forward for his country in the framework of legitimate and representative negotiation. Meanwhile, Nicolás Maduro needs to show some minimum level of good faith for the process to proceed. For Brazil, the 21st of November municipal and regional elections in that country will tell us a lot, will in fact be crucial. And in the light of the principles that undergird the Inter-American Charter, we know that the electoral process must be free, fair, just, and transparent. It must be recognized as such by the opposition and by international observers, and the results of elections must be fully respected. That would be certainly an important step forward, opening the road to the reestablishment of presidential elections and renewed democracy in Venezuela, and a hope for economic and redress in all areas of the life of that country. With regard to our region, there are, of course, other situations that also call to us for our attention. No one is looking to meddle in the domestic affairs of others. One seeks a common good. One seeks to uphold stability, development, and democracy throughout the region. There are no two measures. Minister Brolo, President Sir, one of the strongest contributions of the OAS to democracy in our region, we believe, is the stellar work carried out by the electoral observation missions. These EOMs undergird the right to the vote and the process that is necessary for that vote to take place in any conditions worthy of the name. Brazil stands by the EOMs and very much against any attempt to dismantle them. Brazil, by the way, will be contributing to the voluntary fund of these electoral observation missions, and our president has already, Jair Bolsonaro, agreed to that amount being sent to the OAS. And with a view to ensuring that the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights move forward, we have a candidate who we believe is eminently qualified to join that illustrious group. We will be sending that candidacy soon, and I can only hope that once the court has its own judges and friends, we hope that Rodrigo Modrovich might join the commission. We believe that the hardcore nucleus of the OAS certainly has to be considered not only at this General Assembly, but in the everyday work of this organization. As I said at the start, we know very well that the solutions that will be necessary for us to meet our challenge have to be commonly held. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown how important it is for there to be universal access to vaccines and to other medical means of survival, protective clothing, hospitals. The lack of vaccines, the non-existence of the vaccines to begin with, were a great problem. That was at the start. But now it has been the unequal distribution of vaccines in the hemisphere that is the problem. There has to be greater solidarity, greater access of the members of the OAS to those vaccines. And we are counting certainly there on the fundamental role played by the Pan American Health Organization to assist us to that end. There's no question that health diplomacy will be a very, very valuable result of what we do today in the hemisphere. It will see us as we move forward, as we seek to rebuild our economies to the benefit of all of our societies and to sustainable development in our countries at large. We need a hemispheric vision here. That has not been commonplace. And by the way, it's not enough to rehearse what the structural problems are that have been aggravated. The question of increasing flows of migrants who are desperately seeking a safer future we need to go beyond the immediate daunting problems. We need to have the courage to look at the deep roots of these inequities that call for investment, that call for greater opportunities in trade, in business, setting up new value chains, creating new opportunities for sustainable development and a way to bridge the technological gap. Brazil believes that all of this, which is of such relevance to us, must be looked at the summits of the Americas. And Guatemala's call for renewal in this suggestion that this General Assembly focus on renewal in the Americas couldn't have been more timely. As I said at the beginning of this date, I can assure you that Brazil will stand firm in that endeavor so that we can meet those very important objectives. Minister Brolo, Distinguished Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General, thank you. Thank you very much, my good friend Carlos Alberto Sanza, for this stirring message. For the sake of time, and if you would agree, I would suggest that this plenary take good note of the stirring statements that have been made by heads of delegation, and that, of course, will be reflected in our minutes. Let us now, ladies and gentlemen, proceed to recess for a couple of hours. We will be back at 4 p.m. Washington time. Remember that at 2 p.m. we shall have a retreat of the heads of delegation with the Secretary General and the Assistant Secretary General. Only the heads of delegation shall be present there. See you at 4 p.m. back here. Thank you.